Of course, yeah. So next up, we have the Land Witness Project. We'd like to introduce Nancy Singham, a writer for the Land Witness Project, a website where rural New Mexicans share their stories about the impact of climate change on their lives and their livelihoods. Nancy, go ahead and take it away. You can turn on your camera and all that. I believe we're going to see some videos from them as well. It's a very interesting project.
Okay. There we go. The tech side of this is not my specialty. I just want to first start by thanking the co-op and JR and Erica for setting this up. And it's such an honor to follow behind the great Kavira people. The Regenerate conference is really one of the highlights of my year. It's my favorite conference that I attend, and the Down to Earth podcast. I want to plug that because it's really very interesting. And also just to acknowledge not only the Tiwa land that I have my backyard garden on and honor as best I can, but also just that it's the 51st anniversary of Earth Day. And in that spirit, I actually was a college student in central Pennsylvania in 1970 on the first Earth Day, and attended a teach-in, as was the custom in those days. And so I'm going to start out talking, before we show some of the videos from the Land Witness Project, I'm going to do a little mini teach-in, I guess you could say, about the connection between what is the connection between climate change and these videos we're doing of farmers and ranchers and ski area owners and scientists and land managers all over the state of New Mexico. What are we trying to do here? And the answer to that question really has to do with looking back about what kind of a problem is climate change? I mean, what are we talking about here? What do we think? And it starts out, basically the answer to this question is an accumulation of different answers. So I'm gonna hope everybody's had their breakfast, because I'm gonna make a little layer cake here of the different aspects of climate change. And the first layer starts, well, it starts back with the Industrial Revolution, but we're gonna start in 1988 when James Hansen, climate scientist, and others testified about climate change before the US Congress. And in these hearings, climate change was expressed in scientific terms, you know, the hockey stick graph and the charts and the CO2 rise, charts of warming temperatures, analysis of changing ocean chemistry, ice melting. So naturally, when we first think about climate change, we probably think about the first layer of this cake as climate change as a scientific problem, right? So, and at the time, I really do think that many people hoped that this was the only description of the problem that would be needed. Scientists were going to explain what's happening scientifically, how horrible the impacts would be, and everyone from school kids to businesses to policymakers would get busy, you know, snap to it, start working on these climate solutions. But as we all know, sitting right here, right now, this didn't happen. And while climate change definitely is a scientific problem, there's much more to this cake. So let's jump ahead to the years after 1988. There began to be a discussion to view climate change as an individual problem, requiring the personal carbon footprint solution. You've all heard about the carbon footprint. First people talk about this is what they talk about. The fact that this carbon footprint idea came from, in part from British Petroleum, probably should have been a clue right then and there that this is not the best way to state the problem. While it is definitely true that individual action is absolutely essential, that all of us who can have to raise our voices and do everything that we can to spread the alarm and take action. And we also have to sadly acknowledge that there have already been literally hundreds of climate martyrs, people who have been murdered all over the world for their actions, taking action, defending their land, their culture, and around issues around climate change. But the truth is that even if every single person succeeded in shrinking their own personal carbon footprint as much as they could, this crisis is not going to be solved by that alone. And so the second layer, the second point, descriptor of climate change is that it is definitely a collective problem. It is not just an individual problem, it's a collective problem. So it's a scientific problem, and it is a collective problem of everyone on Earth. But it has also been expressed as a problem of everyone, and I just use that word, but the idea that we all have contributed to climate change by consuming too much is a very common one. But if you take a look, you quickly see that climate change is not really being created equally across the board by everyone on the planet in the same manner. Some have contributed enormously and some very little. So if you look further, you see also that the negative effects of climate change are also not distributed equally, not at all. In fact, the impact of climate change is actually most often greatest on those who have done the absolute least or nothing to contribute to it, both in the United States and globally. It's already affecting first and most deeply, Indigenous people around the world, people of color in general, and women and children. So when we start thinking about what kind of problem it is at its core a problem of both current and historic injustice and inequity. And so we have to think about this if we're going to respond to the crisis in a way that heals and corrects systemic injustices of colonialism and racism rather than adding to them. Equity is a key, and so it's very important that we realize that this is definitely a description or a problem of injustice. So that's the third layer of our cake. And the fourth layer concerns, well, I guess I'd say our species' essential relationship to our biosphere, which sounds really nerdy, I know that. But some people have put forward the idea that climate is just a technical problem. It's got technical solutions. All we need to do is swap out our coal generating plants and with solar and wind, and swap our gas powered cars for electric vehicles, and boom, we'll be back to business. But while we definitely need massive technological innovation on everything from concrete, new kinds of concrete, to new kinds of ocean ships that are not polluting, jet planes, battery storage, the technical aspects are not the essence of the problem. A lot of Western industrial society has long held the view that basically the entire living planet exists exclusively for people to conquer, to use, and then to throw away. This concept is deeply ingrained in colonial history, and frankly, it's still alive and well today. But there is another conception long held by traditional indigenous cultures that holds that our species is not at the top of this pyramid, but one part of this complex, amazing system of billions of living beings, that we can't succeed as a species without having a proper relationship to the entire biosphere, to the complexity, the depth, the wonder of which we are just beginning to grasp. So faced with the rate of species extinctions that is hundreds, even some say thousands of times higher than the natural baseline rate, we're starting to see movements like the Green Amendment that was debated and failed in the New Mexico legislature, or rights of nature movements from Lake Erie to Ecuador, all of which recognize that species and ecosystems are not simply resources for humans to use, but living entities with essential value of their own. So that idea of our relationship to the earth is the fourth layer of our climate change cake. And the last one, I'm speeding through this, is what I'm calling the experience of climate change. What do I mean by that? Well, in 1988, climate change was seen as a vague sort of threat to the future. The catchword was all these politicians were talking about their grandchildren, right? My grandchildren, I'm going to, take this statement and do this work because of my grandchildren. But obviously, this is clearly no longer true. In the United States alone, the victims of California wildfires, the flooded cities of Houston, New Orleans, New York, and those experiencing climate injustice from Louisiana, North Carolina to here in New Mexico, we are now experiencing firsthand the reality that this is not the same world. This is not the same world that I was born into, but even if you're 15 years old, this is not the same world that you were born into. This acceleration of these climate heating is moving much faster than many people predicted and is being experienced by people here in New Mexico right now. And this experience involves not just our thoughts, but also our emotions, our psychology, our culture. It affects our families, our faith, and our communities. So we can't deal with issues of our survival without beginning able to express with all forms of expression, artistic expression. We have to be able to express our fear, our grief, and our anxiety, as well as our courage and our hope. There's so much at stake. We can't possibly build a movement that is going to change the situation we're in without coming together in solidarity, without being able to comfort each other as human beings, allowing time to cry and to mourn, as well as to organize and to fight. So this is the layer of the cake that basically is behind the idea of the Land Witness Project, which through local storytelling brings together the science, the collective action, the justice, the role of our species in the web of life, and our personal and local experiences of climate change. So what we're trying to do with this project, it's sort of a lofty goal, but we're trying to contribute to the solving of the climate problem with local stories from New Mexicans whose daily lives, livelihoods, and actual way of life are being affected by climate change already. So in one last just sort of note on the intention of the project is that each of the different people that we've interviewed, and we've only produced 3 of the videos, but they're from downhill skiers to friends of the Bosque del Apache, pecan growers down in the Mesilla Valley, river rafters, cattle ranchers, and others. All of these people have organizations and people around them. They're based in communities, and our idea has been sort of interrupted by the pandemic, but to utilize these videos to bring together people in those communities and have them talk about these issues, have them recognize when you're a health professional and you are having to see lots more cases of heat stroke, you are seeing climate change in action. Our higher temperatures, athletes literally falling over on the playing fields. So you need to recognize, and that's what we're trying to get discussions going on, recognition that a lot of the things that we're seeing have a basis in climate change as well as other social issues. And so we're hoping to utilize this project to organize people and to spread the word about climate change and what we can do about it. So with that, I am going to try to share my screen. We'll see how this goes, and show the first video of Lorenzo Candelaria, who's a farmer in the South Valley, does a lot of work. If anyone is connected with the APS schools, you may recognize his name and maybe have been to his farm. So I think, is that working? Yeah, okay. He's not even. So here we go. I'm going to see what I can do to introduce Lorenzo. I don't hear the sound.
I have a very real connection to what this living creature is. She's my mother. It's not just dirt that we stand on. We're dependent on her for everything. And if we don't have the gratitude and the appreciation for that, we're all doomed. But the early spring no longer lasts as long as it did. And some of the crops that I plant don't do very well in heat. I mean, I still grow things, but the harvest is a lot less. Well, climate change is a very real thing. I see the changes and I feel the changes. And it doesn't take a scientist to see it, but it does take somebody who is aware. And that awareness is what we try to create here. I've made a very concerted effort to introduce plant materials onto the farm that are drought tolerant. The corns that I grow, they all come from desert areas. I took seeds from several of the pueblos and combined them to come up with a very drought tolerant species of corn, and very prolific. The work that we do with the pueblo is pretty intense because they have a deeper knowledge than I ever will of what the sanctity of our seed, the sovereignty of our seed is. The way we're mitigating the loss of our seeds and loss of some of the crops is by sharing knowledge. How do we live together without fighting over food? Which is survival, no? And that's the way to do it, is to reestablish community. And so the saving of seeds is the saving of life. Agribusiness, the way it is right now, is monoculture. We can see it in the demise of our bees. Bees are not meant to eat one crop. They forage on everything. That form of farming is collapsing. It's not sustainable in and of itself. If we remain silent to the destruction that's happening around us, we're headed for a very rough road. And it's up to the small farmer to understand that the load of supplying food for our communities is on our shoulders. And it's a great responsibility. And it has to be a responsibility that's taken seriously and done with loving kindness and compassion. Food is a gift. And we can't take it for granted. So the effort here is to harvest that consciousness. Grow a tomato and eat it.
There you go. I don't want to narrate too much. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen and show the next video, but no.
As Indigenous people, we hunt, we fish,
Actually,
we grow our own food, we harvest rainwater, we collect clay for potteries, all of these things that set us up for increased exposures just because of our traditional way of life. It's not ever considered when determining environmental exposure regulations in our communities. So we are collateral damage for a lot of the environmental harm happening. Colonization with the Spanish, Mexico, and then now that has still been a constant issue of land loss, unequal distribution of resources, and keeping our people in that systemic poverty cycle. So I saw all these connections between, violence on the land and violence in our communities. We're really impacted by long-term drought, which has set us up for chronic wildfire conditions and dangers. The Las Conchas fire was actually threatening Los Alamos National Laboratories. And because it was going towards the nuclear waste dump, they diverted the fire north. And as a result, we lost over 80% of our forested lands in Santa Clara Pueblo, which was our watershed. So that was a really devastating loss that we're still trying to heal from. It's going to take hundreds of years to restore a forest and watershed to what it once was. How do we put back what's been taken? How do we strengthen Indigenous communities from within so that we're then able to share the knowledge we have about living sustainably through these hard times with everybody else once our communities are healthy and whole and strong? It is very much on seeds and our ability to grow our own food, because if we lose that sovereignty, then basically colonization and assimilation project was successful. You can really see how we've become dependent as a people on acequia farming, which is the flood irrigation method. Now I think we really need to look at the methods of Indigenous peoples of this place, my Tewa ancestors and others, to going back to those dryland farming techniques. We wanted to focus on creating community gardens in Espanola. We started looking for sites, and in Valdez Park there's a really steep slope that had a bad runoff erosion issue, and so we saw it as an opportunity to do a design using dryland farming methods. We're really passionate about growing our native heirloom seeds from this region and growing them out year after year, and trying to encourage people to do that same thing so that they can adapt. The seeds are strong like the people. They've gone through colonization alongside us. They've gone through droughts before. As climate change impacts increase, it's pretty obvious that we're going to be that little kind of central belt that's going to have to feed people and take in climate refugees. If we think we might not have to cross that border to the south someday, we're fooling ourselves. You know, we need to have that diplomacy of healthy relations with our neighbor countries. Northern and Southern Indigenous peoples are still sharing knowledge with each other. We still know how to survive solely off the land and with food from these places. That is priceless knowledge that needs to be preserved and cherished and protected.
Again, I'm not very good at this technical stuff. Sorry I clipped off the beginning of that, but that was as Erica.
Hey y'all, Andrew here with Free Tours by Foot New Orleans. It is springtime here, that time of the year when hope begins to grow like a plant in the crack of a sidewalk. That's not a completely improvised metaphor, just spotted one here, a little snapdragon. So, given that, and given that it might not quite be spring where you are, I want to share with you today a walk through one of the most flat.
Okay, there we go. I just wanted to give a quick introduction, but maybe we'll go to this last story to make sure we get the videos in. This is from the Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge. And Kevin Cobble was the manager there for several years, and he has a different but still amazing story to tell. So let's see if I can get back to sharing the screen. And we'll be good to go, I promise. Okay.
First time I came up here, I was in Boy Scouts. I was probably about 10 years old. So I've been coming here a long time. It is a spiritual place. It's just a magical place to me. One of the things I've seen, and I think is everybody around here, is that the winters are not as cold as they used to be in central New Mexico. What we're seeing is our cranes and geese are tending to come a little bit later than they used to. We think it's about a 2 to 3 week delay in their coming south in the fall than what they historically did, and they're leaving 2 to 3 weeks earlier in the spring. Javelina are now well established on the refuge. They're typically more of a Central American, South American species. 30 years ago, nobody ever saw a javelina here, to being probably the most abundant large mammal on the refuge now. I believe it's the lack of cold winters has allowed those species to move north, and I think that's probably a result of climate change. The refuge is, not, like I say, not only important for wildlife, but for bringing in tourism and economic activity into the area. Seems like every decade, the amount of water that's produced by the Rio Grande in the watershed has declined. All the predictions are that that will get even worse. We're dealing with this disappearing water source. Water is what drives this place. Without water, there would be nothing here. I think people need to go find a place like Bosque del Apache or any wildlife or any outdoor area that they can get a hold of, and they can fight to protect and enhance. taking on the climate change. It is the most important things in our lives and the lives of our kids.
So just to shout out credit to our amazing videographer, Christy Bodie. You can see very easily that she does amazing work, not only, oh dear.
As Indigenous people, we hunt, we
Sorry.
fish, we grow our own food, we harvest rainwater, we collect
There
clay.
I've got it now. And just to bring out a couple of further points, one of the things you may notice is just that our every story has actions that people can take right at the end of the story. And also we have a really detailed website. I'm actually a writer for this project, and we've written up these stories. We've added information. Perhaps you're new to New Mexico and you don't know what an acequia is that Lorenzo is talking about. You can find the subtext of that and learn about that on the websites, as well as other actions that can be taken. And some of these are really in-depth analyses. So I urge people to go to the landwitnessproject.com and have a look. And also just the emphasizing the action piece that we've taken videos already from not only these three amazing people, but also from ski areas and ranchers and farmers and other businesses and people all over the state. So encourage people to come back and visit us from time to time. I don't know if people have questions or.
I haven't seen any in chat, but we do have just a minute here, and I had a couple that I can pull from. So you already answered one, you know, what stories are coming next. So that's interesting to hear about those. And is that just I assume there's not a hard timetable on that. It's just keep an eye on the Land Witness Project, and we'll see as you release new videos.
Yes, we've done 9 interviews so far.
Oh, wow.
We've got 3 up, and we're producing. So the next ones that we're producing are the ski areas. There's a project with Trout Unlimited took place up in Cuesta. That's very interesting. Also, Valles Caldera, we did an interview there with the chief scientist, and river rafting. So, and any number of different things. And as soon as this phrases, we have a long list of other people that we'd like to interview. But so, yeah.
Nice. So there's a lot to look forward to. That's really great. I really, really like that that human element and that storytelling angle that you're taking on climate change, because you're right. A lot of stuff focuses on all the technical sides of things, and this is an important part of this problem. Yeah. So thank you so much.
It's an honor to share with everybody. Thank you.